But we weren't the first group that didn't go to the White House.
Nope.
I mean, there was Tim Thomas.
Tim Thomas, goalie for the Bruins.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And there was Matt Burke, I believe.
Yep.
I don't want to slander him.
And Larry Bird.
Larry Bird.
Larry Bird in 83.
Who did he skip?
Reagan.
Yeah.
And there's a quote in the book which is remarkable to me. I don't know that he did. Tim Thomas was definitely for political reasons.
Yes.
I don't know if Bird skipped for political reasons. I don't think he did. He's not super political. But the quote in the book is amazing. He says, if Reagan wants me, he knows where to find me, which is like an amazing quote, beautiful. Like pretty ballsy.
All right, this is a special treat. This is a thinking man's pod, thinking woman's pod. So from time to time with a history teacher on staff, we go backwards, and we love talking about presidents. And I am really excited to have Chris Cillizza in studio today. He drove down from D.C. to talk about, among other things, his book, Power Players. It's about how basically sports and the presidency kind of overlap in the history of our country. We see sports as sports fans as entertainment, but if you're the president, you might see it as an opportunity. And I think it's a really interesting topic. You might know Chris from the Kornheiser Show, from CNN, Washington Post. You catch him on Substack. He's got a really good following, and we just met. So I want to welcome Chris into the studio.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, dude.
Glad to be in Charlottesville.
It's great having somebody in studio.
Yeah, it's way better.
Yeah.
I mean, years in TV has taught me that if you can be in person, you're much better off. Remote is not as good.
And that's the way the whole landscape, we were talking about the whole landscape before we popped on, but that's the way the landscape's going. So anytime we're not on Zoom post-pandemic, I'm a happy man. And so I appreciate you being here. What's tougher, Meet the Press or coming down here for Greenlight Pod?
Well, this just started, so I don't know that I can make a total determination on that. Meet the Press isn't bad.
Yeah.
It's funny. Life is all relationship driven. So I know Chuck Todd really well. Yeah. Also, by the way, huge sports fan.
Really?
Yeah.
Miami Hurricanes, right?
Went to University of Miami on a French horn scholarship.
No
Fun fact.
French horn scholarship.
Swear to God, that is they are. Yeah. Get your kid playing the French horn. You think your kid should be playing basketball?
Good school too.
I think it should be playing basketball. They should be playing the French horn. So it's not as nerve-wracking as you might think. TV is it's like everything else. The first time I was ever on TV, I was on C-SPAN when I was 24, and I literally look like I'm going to have a heart attack. Mm-hmm. I'm like sweating. Mm-hmm. It's rough.
Yeah.
Got like my dad's wool suit coat on. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not a good look. But over time, you either stop doing it or you get less nervous doing it. So.
Yeah. No question.
Plus, I've always liked to hear myself talk.
No, I mean, me too. That's why I have a podcast.
Yeah, right.
So we have that in common. If we're talking about presidents in sports, before we get there, since you have a really wide-ranging kind of network of relationships in the media, who's a great athlete in the political media?
Good question.
Yeah, who could actually throw a ball around or hit a ball?
So, Chris, my experience primarily is playing basketball because that's what I was, to the extent I was ever good at anything. Yeah. I was good at playing basketball.
Tall guy.
I was like this height when I was 12.
What are you, 6'3", 6'4"?
6'3".
Yeah.
When I was 12, that was a huge advantage. In my town of 5,000 people, I was housing people.
Yeah.
I was just killing people. I didn't realize the world was bigger than my town of 5,000 people in rural Connecticut. Chris Hayes is a good basketball player from MSNBC. Yeah. Good drive, pretty tough, competitive, guy you would want to play pickup basketball with. Who else is good? Guy named Paul Jagot, who's the editor of the Wall Street Journal's op-ed page. He's older now, but physical, tough. I like people who mix it up because if you even pick up basketball in DC,
people calling fouls.
Pick up basketball in DC is like semi-political because it's like, I for years played at Gonzaga High School.
Yeah.
I didn't play at Gonzaga; they're incredible, but I played pickup at Gonzaga High School, and it would be a bunch of lobbyists and guys who worked for members of Congress and former members of Congress and media types. I like the people that get into it.
Hard fouls?
Yeah.
Like politically driven hard fouls?
I always wondered about that. I'd always say, you can do whatever you want, but just don't touch the face.
Yeah.
For me, it's the moneymaker.
TV.
Yeah. I'd go from playing pickup and I'd like take, you try to like, you got to go out and I'd have to go do TV. And so I'd finish playing basketball at like 7:30 and I'd be on TV at 8:30. And I'm like, that's plenty of time. I'll cool down, take like a super cold shower and then get out and still be sweating like a pig.
Like a tomato.
Totally. It's really the worst. I did that a number of times. So there's a few. You know who's really good basketball player is John Thune, the senator, John Thune. Yeah. He played at Biola, Biblical Institute of Los Angeles, NAIA school. He's tall. He's about 6'5", 6'6". He's older now. He's probably in his 60s. I don't want to age him, but I think he's in his 60s. Yep. I played with him when he was in his late 40s. He's good. Okay. I mean, he can play. He can shoot. Okay. He was good. There's a few lobbyists out there who are good. But yeah, look, DC is not the world's most athletic place. Like when you're talking about the political world, it's not like the. Yeah. I mean, Bill Bradley was a great basketball player, but that was like before my time. You know what I'm saying?
And why are sports and politics so seemingly inextricably linked? I mean, like around the world too.
Well, you can talk to this, I think, too, as a professional athlete. Like, I think there are two things that really. Well, one big thing that really drives it is ambition. So politicians are ambitious just by nature, really ambitious people, high achieving, really, really strong willpower, people who are drawn to performing in public. I mean, I always say, like, look, you could be on the Montgomery County Council in D.C. and, you're not on TV. Like, if you're running for president of the United States, you're performing. I mean, it's a performance job in front of lots and lots of people. You like getting cheered. I mean, I would assume at least part of what drives professional athletes is you run out and people scream your name.
You feed off the crowd.
Right, exactly. Same thing. I think they're really competitive people too. Yeah. Again, politics is
healthy egos.
Yes, and a healthy ego. Let me talk about the ego thing for a sec. Think about if you want to run for president, what you're saying. You, among 330 million people, are uniquely skilled to represent all those people. It's a massive egotistical statement. You know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't feel comfortable saying that in my family, much less like, the country. And I also think the competitiveness thing is really important because, again, you are choosing to be judged by a fickle public. Which again is not all that dissimilar from sports. It's like, one GM to another GM or one coach to another coach or just the public of, fans of the team. I always ask people who are not in politics, like, just imagine if your life was every 2 years, your coworkers got to vote on whether you kept your job or not. That's politics. Yeah. I mean, every 2 years, you have to go 6 if you're in the Senate, 2 if you're in the House, 4 if you're president. But every couple years, you have to go and have judgment rendered on you by the people who you represent. It's a hard thing. And I think it's a certain kind of person, really ambitious, really competitive, that is drawn to it.
I always feel like, does it possibly disqualify the people who would be best suited to run a country because the personality type that demands that ascension and the willingness to burn bridges, the ego, the willingness to kind of forego your values for the greater good of the party and that sort of thing, the quid pro quo. Like, the people I imagine that I'd want to run the country wouldn't be willing to do all those things.
No, we were talking about this beforehand, is, how do you wind up with an 80-year-old and a 76-year-old who have already run once against one another? How do you wind up with the two of them?
I'm wondering the same thing.
Right. How do you wind up with the two of them? And the reason I think is because politics is not an appealing profession.
Right.
It's already hard, as I mentioned. Like, you're going out having to raise a ton of money, ask for votes constantly, ask for money probably even more constantly than you're asking for votes. You figure if you're going to run for president, you got to raise at least $1 billion. That Biden raised $1.3 billion. Trump breaks all rules, but probably less than that, but still in the $1 billion range. I mean, just think about the difficulty of raising $1 million. And then add 999 more to that. You're subject to I don't want to call it character assassination, but a deep dive into your character. And I would suggest that most people in this country, certainly myself included, if every national reporter was diving into my background, I'm not sure how well I would fare.
What's that like for them? Because I always wondered if I were to run for president, not that I'm thinking about it, but just the only lens that I look at it through is, what would that background check be like?
Yeah.
And what goes into that? And are there ways that they combat that? Like, if you're getting ready to run, do you go back through your
you do
your history, and you've got somebody who is assigned to wiping the slate clean?
If you're smart, and not all of them are smart about it, but if you've got good people around you, what you do is you do an Oppo research book on yourself. So you have a private investigator. There are people who just do opposition research, so they go through public records, and obviously, if you've ever been arrested before and all, they go through all that stuff. Yeah. That stuff's easy. But divorce proceedings, I mean, the number of times Senate, House, and presidential races where it's like, it starts off like, oh, the divorce proceedings are sealed, and then it's like, oh, here are the divorce proceedings. It's like, well, I thought they were like, everything comes out is the general rule. So I think the smartest thing, it's like life, you're better off getting ahead of it so you know it's coming. Now, can you wipe stuff clean? I'm skeptical you can forget anything in the age of the internet. I'm skeptical anything goes away.
And that's the thing, is now I feel like, forecast 20 years down the road, it's going to be almost impossible to run under that standard that somebody in the 90s would have run, where you had to be relatively squeaky clean. There's a paper trail for everything now, and it's electronic, and there's video of you doing X, Y, and Z. It's like the standard has naturally lowered. Trump.
Well, obviously. I was going to say Trump. I mean, look, I still remember when Trump emerged on the scene. This is May 2015. My main criticism of him was like, this was still a party that was very socially conservative, the Republican Party. This is a guy who'd been married 3 times. His current wife is significantly younger than he is. He's got kids from several different marriages. I just figured that won't fly. Now, again, Trump, I think it's important to remember, breaks every rule. Now, the question is it just him breaking the rule? Like, is it a one-off? Is it an anomaly? Like, yes, he breaks the rules, but the rules are still the same for everybody else? Or not? I mean, in the 2016, my favorite / the worst part of the 2016 campaign was Marco Rubio for 2 days tried to get in the gutter with Trump. And his big attack, if you remember it, was Trump has small hands. You know what that means. Like, that was the whole thing. And Trump, in a debate, which still stuns me, I went and watched this the other week, in a debate said, trust me, there's no problem down there. I guarantee it, which is really remarkable.
I assigned my middle school students to watch that debate, immediately regretted it.
I mean, it's stunning. Like, it's stunning.
The debates are awful.
It's stunning that occurred. Like, and yet you would think like, oh, that's bad. Talking about his genitalia size might be bad for Donald Trump. Nope. Totally fine for him. It was bad for Marco Rubio. People are like, oh, I can't believe Marco Rubio is playing dirty pool. And you're like, wait, what? Like, what about the other guy? So that's the thing with him, is I don't know whether we've changed as a country, whether it's through the social media, rise of the internet, whatever. We've changed as a country. We don't expect that out of our politicians anymore. Being divorced. I mean, it was such a big deal that Reagan was divorced and remarried. It was like a huge thing. Now you got a guy who's on his 3rd marriage, right? Does it not matter anymore? Or is it just Trump, and then, it matters for everybody not named Trump?
I think it's the mental gymnastics of whoever you want to be the guy.
Totally. You can shoehorn your belief system into almost anything.
Did I hear that LBJ had big hands?
Huge. Big guy.
Big hands.
Yes. And also, you want to talk about a guy who was comfortable with public nudity. There's all these, there's some of this stuff in the book. He was famous for having people come in while he was going to the bathroom, like pulling people into the bathroom while he was going, literally, actively.
Check this out.
Yeah. And he would talk a lot about the size of his Johnson, like in public, like not like public speeches, but like with other people, including his aides. He was fascinated by it. He had a nickname for it.
What was the nickname?
I don't remember. I blocked that out. Yeah, I blocked that out a while ago. I couldn't live with that information. Couldn't have that information right on hand.
So the other thing I think about sports and politics is the fact that his presidential penis nickname was Jumbo.
There you go.
So it's
God bless the internet.
Now you have it in your head.
Now, thanks. Great.
But yeah, we talk politics on this pod. When it comes to the presidency and world leaders at large, like a lot of them are men, and I do believe it's hard to ignore the masculine nature of like being in with the guys and being in with the most popular teams and leagues, like that kind of, and a lot of these guys aren't jocks. A lot of
most
these guys
of them are not
athletic, and the feeling of like I'm in the club, and I'm pictured in the club, and I'm shaking hands.
Totally.
With this team.
The one that jumps to mind there is Reagan. So Reagan is like a very indifferent athlete. He played all these guys. I mean, it's so hard because times have changed so much. Many of these guys played football in college.
Yeah.
But it's not like how you played football in college. You know what I mean? It's like Reagan played at Eureka College, which is this tiny school in California. So he plays, but it was more. He doesn't really care about it. He's not into it to the extent he cares at all about sports. Is he played this guy named George Gipp in Newt Rockne All-American, this old-timey movie.
Yep.
He plays this running back who gets sick and dies.
Yeah.
And so that's where Win One for the Gipper comes from. It's all from that movie. So the extent he cares about anything, he cares about Notre Dame football, because that movie is about Notre Dame football. Again, it's a totally fictional account, but like Reagan gets into it. But Reagan is smart, to your point about wanting to be in with like the in crowd. What Reagan realizes is like, wait a minute, being pictured around great athletes is good for me.
Yeah. So
Reagan formalizes the process of bringing in Super Bowl winning teams, NBA champions, college champions into the White House. Mm-hmm. We think of that happening all the time now. Mm-hmm. That was Reagan.
Yeah.
And there's great footage. God bless YouTube for this book, because there's great footage on YouTube of like Reagan shooting a puck into a goal that they set up, Reagan throwing a football, Reagan shooting a basketball.
How many takes?
Yeah, you don't know how many takes it took. I agree. They didn't show that.
Yeah.
But he loved like getting the jersey, and he was fascinated. I mean, some of the stuff, this is in the book. He's like totally fascinated by how tall Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was. Like he had to stoop to get into the Oval Office. So he got it. He understood that in sort of which I don't think should be terribly surprising. This is a guy who built his career as an actor. Mm-hmm. He gets perception.
Yeah.
He gets that perception often trumps reality. So when you ask people like, who was a good athlete president? A lot of people will say Reagan.
Yeah.
And most people, Ford is sort of a forgotten president, but to the extent that people have any impression of Jerry Ford, it's like he was clumsy. He's kind of an oaf. He was terrible at golf. Like Jerry Ford was an All-American offensive lineman at Michigan.
Yeah, and linebacker, right?
Yes, he had offers to play for the Lions and the Packers. Coming out of college.
Yeah.
Now he turned them down to go to law school, which like talk about decisions that like are different today than they were then. Back then it was like $800 a week or something to play professional sports. It was not like it is now. But like the perception of him is that he was this like terrible athlete. He was pretty bad at golf.
Yeah.
But he's like a really good skier. He's like a really good natural athlete, but he downplays it because he doesn't want to be a dumb jock.
Yeah. And he might be one of the best athletes of all the presidents.
Best athlete.
Really?
Yeah, no question.
And you wrote.
I should say, I always say this about it. I wrote about from Eisenhower to Biden.
Yeah.
So that's 13 presidents. Like, is it possible that like Millard Fillmore was like a great athlete?
Or like Teddy Roosevelt. I mean, he seemed to be great at everything.
He was he was like clearly a good outdoorsman. Teddy Roosevelt effectively saves football. He brings in the heads of Princeton and Yale, the like powerhouses of college football at the time, which is not what they are now. But at the time, it's Ivy Leagues. Brings them in because people are dying on the field and like suffering brain injury, and they bring the modern the forward pass in. They change a bunch of rules that makes football grow. So yes, Roosevelt is one, but to me, it's like clearly Ford, just because he played Division I athletics at a super high level.
Yeah.
No one else did that. Bush Sr., so George H.W. Bush, played baseball at Yale.
Yeah.
Light hitting, slick fielding first baseman. Never had any. I don't think had any dreams. Maybe had dreams of, but never any real chance of being a pro.
Yeah.
Not good enough.
Yeah.
But other than that, like, I would say more than half of them are mediocre to bad athletes. Doesn't mean they don't. Other than Johnson does not compete in any sports. Doesn't care. Never interested. The rest of them play sports. Nixon plays football in college at Whittier College. Fascinating because it's like there's all these great interviews with his teammates from the time where they're like, he was basically a tackling dummy.
Yes.
I mean, there's some guys.
We need those.
You need the practice squad too. And practice squad would be like a real step up for Nixon, to be honest. But he's at this tiny school and he's just a guy who gets tackled. He's a guy who gets knocked down.
But he was like the biggest sports fan, right?
Huge fanatic sports fan. My favorite story about it, like, talk about focused on the wrong stuff. So during Watergate, this AP reporter, like at the end of a press conference, this AP reporter is like, who's your favorite baseball player ever? And Nixon says something like, let me get back to you, which usually I always say, when a politician says, let me get back to you, it's basically like, I will never answer this question ever in my life. It's like code. But Nixon goes to Camp David with his son-in-law, David Eisenhower, who is married to Julie Nixon. And he comes up with, I mean, this is like so over the top. He comes up with 4 different teams. One from like 1850 to 1930 American League and National League. One 1930 to the 60s American League and National League. And it's not just like Ted Williams, Joe DiMaggio. He like goes way deep into it. Like he's got like the left-handed relief pitcher out of the bullpen. He's like so into it. And again, just a reminder, this is during Watergate. Like there were other fish to fry.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe he needed a distraction.
Got like a big board in his
right, exactly. I'm like, why is he that into it?
Yeah.
But yeah, he is the biggest fan. I mean, I think the right way to see Nixon is like the guy who in the modern era would be the team manager. Like he's not good enough at sports to really play. Back then it was like
we'd hire him here to do like research and
totally. He'd be great at that.
Yeah,
that would be his wheelhouse. He loved that stuff.
Yeah.
He loves stats and all that stuff. So yeah, he's like that guy. He's like the stats guy. Who's real into it and who knows everything about it, but never played it. Certainly was not good if and when he played it, but is obsessed with it. I mean, Nixon is like you mentioned at the start, like we think of sports as something we do for fun and distraction, and and politicians, like, do they use sports for their own political gains? The answer to that is, of course, is yes. They're politicians. They use everything for political gain. But Nixon actually is like a real, genuine
in it for
fan.
the right reasons.
Yeah, I think he is like a legitimate fan. Look, he did some stuff. He goes to 1969. It's called the Game of the Century. It's Texas versus Arkansas, college football. They're both undefeated at the time. He goes to that game on the advice of his political people who say that this is like in your wheelhouse and, this is these are your people. So he goes, there's a great part of that game. So he goes to that game, he goes into the booth at halftime, and Arkansas is winning, and he predicts Texas wins. Now, who is watching that game at home? Young Bill Clinton.
No way.
Yes. And Bill Clinton still, it's in the book, Bill Clinton still remembers how pissed off he was at Nixon for what he took. Texas goes on to win. Texas goes on to win. And Clinton, obviously, Clinton is another one who's actually like a real fan, at least of the Arkansas teams, football and basketball. And he's just pissed at him for years that he picked it. That's
why he got into politics.
Now, another interesting thing about that is Joe Paterno is like rip shit. That because what Nixon essentially does is say this is obviously before the BCS championship, like this is it was like declaring a national champion was random. So Nixon essentially says like whoever wins this game will be the national champion.
Right.
Penn State is undefeated that year too, and Paterno, there's these great Paterno quotes. They're in the book. There's these great Paterno quotes like maybe Richard Nixon should spend more time with politics than sports. Like he's pissed because he thinks Penn State
stick to politics.
Right. Bill Clinton. One time, I love this story too, just about fans, like a real fan. He goes to, in 94, I think that's right, Duke and Arkansas are playing in the college basketball national championship. It's 94, right?
Yeah,
okay.
I always remember that Final Four. There's UCLA, Oklahoma State. Is Big Country Reeves.
Yep, Bryant Reeves.
And Arkansas and UNC maybe.
It was a UNC Arkansas has Scotty Thurman.
Yeah.
They have Corliss Williamson. Those are their two big guys. And the coach is Noel Richardson. It was the whole 40 minutes of hell thing. They pressed the whole game, right? Clinton, he spends the morning at Jacobs Field. Opening Jacobs Field for the then Cleveland Indians. Yes. He throws out the first pitch. It's a day game, blah, 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 blah. He then goes at night to the national championship game, and he's in a box. Obviously, he's the president of the United States, and he's like really pissed at the refereeing. Like, I mean, welcome to every team that's ever played Duke in college basketball ever.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, oh, you think that Duke is getting the calls? What a giant surprise!
Do you also hate Duke?
Yes.
Okay. You're in good company.
I'm a Georgetown fan. I hate everyone who's not Georgetown, basically, which is a lot of people. We're so bad now. I feel like it's almost impossible. I've lost my ability to care. I've moved into stunned apathy.
Try losing to a 16 seed.
Yeah, there is that. Well, you've won a national championship in the last few years.
You're right. It's hard to come back.
I mean, anyway, he goes to this game and he's like wildly gesticulating in the box at the refs. And like the camera pans up to him and like shows him. And so at halftime, they have to sit him down and be like, Mr. President, like you can't.
Not a good look.
Yeah, like you can't do that.
Yeah.
Like we get that Arkansas is getting screwed and Duke is their favorite. But like you're the president of the United States, so you can't behave that way. Yeah. Arkansas goes on and wins. He goes in the locker room. It's like a huge moment for him. But he's another one who's like an actual fan.
Yeah.
Particularly of the Arkansas teams. You get beyond that. He winds up being like, interestingly, like a big soccer advocate. Tried to get the World Cup here this time around. Lost out to it. I talked to a guy who was there when he was given the presentation. This is like 6 years ago, and said that Clinton spoke entirely about him. So typical. Clinton spoke entirely about himself and didn't talk at all about the U.S. in the Olympics, and that Morgan Freeman was also there as part of the presentation, and like couldn't get his cue cards right or something. Like the presentation was a cluster.
A shit show.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But he got into soccer. The Women's World Cup was in the United States during his presidency. But like, so he and Nixon are the two that I think, and Obama certainly, particularly of the NBA and college basketball. Biden is not a huge fan. Yeah. Never has been. Played football in high school, was a good wide receiver. Was supposed to play at Syracuse, at Delaware, and got terrible grades, and his parents said you can't play. Yeah. But it's like beyond that, I don't think he cares that much.
The leather helmet era.
Yeah, there's a great line that Lyndon Johnson had about Jerry Ford. He said Jerry Ford played too many games without a helmet on, because like the whole knock on Ford was that he was dumb. Yeah, and by the way, that's why Ford doesn't talk about what a good athlete he is, because he's self-conscious about being a dumb jock. Yeah, which is totally fascinating and I think that's at least in part why people have this impression of him as like clumsy, is because he lets that be the image of him, even though like Jerry Ford is like very, very athletic. Yeah. Like especially compared to the rest of the people we're talking about, like from Eisenhower on. I mean, he's clearly the best athlete.
Did Nixon call a play for the Redskins? Yeah. Because he was a big Redskins fan. This is in the playoffs.
Yeah. So George Allen is the coach at the time. Yes. He knows Allen through politics stuff. I write a lot about this. It's never entirely clear whether he calls a play or not. He goes to a practice earlier in the season. It's apparently that they run an end around is the play. It's not clear that Nixon like calls it in. There's all these stories like Nixon called in it. He called George Allen on the phone. The play is run in the end of the first half of a game. The Redskins at the time are winning like
a waste play.
Yeah, they're about to go. It's actually interesting. They're about to go in for a touchdown. They're on like the 10. And they run this play, and they're already ahead. They run this play, and it's like a 25-yard loss. Yeah. And so they don't score. Yeah. And they go on and lose the game. And so Nixon takes all the shit for it because it's like, well, Nixon called a terrible play, and it cost something. It's not entirely clear he like called it. It's like there's some people who say George Allen told Nixon to tell them to run an end around because George Allen wanted that run. I think it's very much not, talk about three-dimensional chess. I think it's very much not true that Nixon called the sidelines and told George Allen to do it, and George Allen did it. They knew one another. Nixon had been to a practice. Sure, he could have suggested a play. Because again, think about what we know about Nixon. He's like the uber nerd fan. So yeah, he's like scheming plays up. Like, is that surprising? It's like these guys who call in the sports. Yes, it's like guys who call in the sports talk radio. Like, we're in a 4-3 and we need to do. It's like this very complicated stuff because they think they know. I watch all 22, and so I know exactly what everything looks like. I mean, that's Nixon. Like, if you're willing to let, people always say, it's funny you mentioned sports radio. People, as I'm doing promo for the book, they're like, who's the president most likely to call into a sports talk radio station? I'm like, it's Nixon 100 times out of 100.
Yeah.
He would be like, Dick from Washington. He would be calling in all the time because that's who he is. Like, that's what, so
he'd have a Pro Football Focus account.
Exactly. He'd be big into fantasy football. Like all that stuff makes sense. So it makes sense what we know about him personality wise that he would do that.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly. I think he probably gets more blame for this idea that like in real time, I mean, think about it. It was far enough ago. It was the 70s. It's not as though like he texts George Allen.
No.
George Allen on the sideline looks it up. Like, how would you get that call to him? You call like the offensive coordinator. You call RFK Stadium.
The red phone.
Yes. Can I please talk to George Allen? Like there's no. Yeah. So I think it's a little overblown, but I think he did probably suggest a play that, yes, that play wound up being a big loser
for. Like, all right, we're running that Richard Nixon play. Where the fuck?
25-yard loss on an end around.
So was he the first guy, if I understand it correctly, that used a national broadcast to get on TV during a sporting event?
Yeah. So he does. I mean, the game of the century is broadcast on national television. Yeah. Look. For everything I just said about Richard Nixon being a real fan, he also understood the power and persuasive nature of sports. So Nixon's whole thing was a silent majority, that there was a majority in this country who agreed with him. They were sort of on the quiet side, but that's how he would get elected. So whether it's college football that he was focused very much on throughout his life, his political life, as a way to kind of reach that silent majority, and I talk a lot about this in the book, but it's really important to Nixon, bowling.
Yeah, he'd bowl alone, right? He got the bowling alley put in the White House.
He got the bowling alley put in the White House. So I always say to people, like, bowling in the late 60s and early 70s was not what it is today.
It was like
a big deal. Yeah. Like the first sponsored athlete, this is crazy to me. I found this out doing the book. The first athlete to get a company to sponsor them was a professional bowler.
That's wild.
Which, like, I mean, it seems unimaginable. It's like a great fact wow, you're very nerdy friends. But it would be, I mean, it's like how could that possibly be true? But so bowling was like a huge deal in the 60s and early 70s. He has an alley put in, and he would go, I mean, this is amazing to me. So, like, he's talking to the press about this. He's like, when at 10 o'clock at night, a lot of nights, I go to the alley and I bowl between 7 and 12 games by myself. Like what is the time commitment?
Yeah.
So he's bowling by himself in, that famous picture. It's in Big Lebowski of him bowling with like the suit on and the white shoes. That's from the White House bowling alley.
Yeah.
And I think it's like such a powerful image of Nixon. Like it was a combo. I think he liked bowling. He was pretty good. It was the one sport he was pretty good at. He rolled a 229 at one point in his life. But like, I just think he thought it was good for his politics too. There's no question about that. Like he thought that the silent majority, white, male, rural, blue collar, that was who he thought the silent majority was, and they bowled. So he was doing it for political reasons. But the image, as well as he enjoyed it, the image of him, you said bowling alone, like that image, I just keep coming back to, like frame after frame at like midnight, just slinging balls by himself.
It's amazing.
Like, and it's so telling about who the guy was fundamentally. Like he's a loner. He's super uncomfortable with small talk. He's not social in any meaningful way.
Like not like a president.
Not at all. Like when you think of like Barack Obama or Bill Clinton or George W. Bush, like people who are good at bullshitting.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in a pejorative way.
Yeah.
Just good at talking.
Yeah.
Good at talking to people.
Yeah.
He's the opposite of that.
Yeah.
He actually uses sports all the time. That's one way that Nixon uses sports to help him. He never knows how to talk to people, like on the campaign trail. He never knows what to say. He's super awkward. I mean, if you've ever seen him speak, he's an awkward speaker. He's not someone, if you were picking like that guy would run for president one day.
Now. He couldn't
He would struggle now. Yeah. Although I would point out, like Ron DeSantis, if you look at Ron, not to get too modern politics, but if you look at Ron DeSantis, like he's so awkward on the campaign trail. I don't know how that'll wear.
Yeah,
but like some of the stuff he does, like he walked into this diner in New Hampshire the other day. I don't want to get too much on a tangent, but he walks in this diner in New Hampshire and he's like, he doesn't even say hello. He's just like, okay, now what do I do? Like it's like a robot.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Did you see this?
I did.
It's just, it's just so awkward. And you're like, I can't believe that this guy is like in the business of.
But the everyman eats that up.
It's just crazy. Now, that said, like if we went down to a diner, whatever diner's close to here, and I had to like go introduce myself to every person in there, like I'm not sure I would like really love that either. It's an awkward thing, but I also am not trying to run for president. Nixon is like that. But he uses sports and his like nerdy sports knowledge to, he'll be like, oh, did you see the Yankee game the other day? You know what I mean? Like he's able to use sports as a bridge because sports is one of the themes of the book is, sports is this common language that people speak, much more so than politics. And if you're a politician, your MO is like, how can I reach people? How can I get people to think I'm one of them? I understand them. I care about them. I'm similar to them. Even though I'm running for this like very high office, I get their life. And sports is a way to do that.
We should bring back bowling as a conduit for that.
Yeah. So speaking of bowling, like was that one of Obama's biggest gaffes?
Yes.
2008 campaign.
Totally.
37, I believe.
Yes. So Obama goes to, I love this story. Obama is I think he's in Pennsylvania, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, sir.
And he goes to a bowling alley. Now, I talked to David Axelrod, his consultant, about it. And they're like, we didn't expect him to actually bowl. We just thought he'd go see some people, whatever. Like it's an event. And like Axelrod gets a call from the advanced guy, and the advanced guy's like, he's going to bowl. And they're like, wow, shit. Obama's like he's probably in the top third of the athletes of the presidents I covered. He's a good recreational athlete.
Yeah.
He's a pretty decent basketball player. I mean, again, is he as good? He's playing pickup games with Chris Paul and LeBron and Kobe. Like, no, he's not even.
Yeah.
He's like maybe D3 rotational player is what I would say.
Got it.
He's not bad. Look, I was not a D3 rotational player.
Good,
right. Yeah.
Pretty good basketball.
He's not a bad, and he's good in pickup because he's left-handed and he can shoot.
Okay.
So. But he's a pretty like overall able athlete.
Yeah.
But he's like, I don't think he's ever bowled before.
Yeah.
Right. And like bowling is not the world's most natural. Like you don't have to be, just because you're a pretty good athlete does not mean you're a great bowler.
I know from experience.
Right. Same. I'm like in the 30s. Yeah. That's my bit. My kids are beating me at this point. It's not great. So he bowls like a 30 something.
Yeah.
Which again is like strikingly bad. Like if you did the like between your legs roll it slow bit, which you can't do when you're president, but like or running for president. But this is 2008, and it's like it turns into a total problem for them. Yeah. And Axelrod is like having to handle it, and like they're trying to like
How do you handle that?
Get him to stop bowling, like just stop mid. Don't get a full score.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because a full score, you can be like, he shot a 37. You know what I mean? Otherwise, you can be like, he bowled a few frames. He wasn't great, but like, who cares? He left.
He had something to
and
do.
you could just say like, oh, I gotta meet a constituent. You can always make an excuse. But what's interesting about Obama, and I think telling, is Obama is like fixated on how poorly he's done, and like goes and like privately bowls a bunch to ensure that if he's ever in that situation again. That he won't bowl at 30. No, he will never be in that situation again. Exactly. The poor advanced guy is probably like looking for jobs. He's like on LinkedIn looking for jobs, But like, I do think that's telling about Obama, like a relentless person. It's why he's into golf too. Relentless, like practice makes perfect, perfectionism.
Yeah.
But yeah. It's fascinating to me. I did not get into the book thinking that bowling would be like a primary theme, but at least two of them. And George W. Bush duck pin bowls when he's in New Hampshire, which growing up in Connecticut, I did a lot of duck pin bowling. And is actually, Bush is like a good overall, all-around athlete.
Yeah.
pretty good at football, pretty good at baseball, like picks things up pretty.
Yeah.
He reminds me of my wife, like picks stuff up easily, like can do a lot of different stuff pretty well.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, natural.
Right. And so he's fine at it in a way that like Obama is more of a specialty athlete. Because Obama is, by all accounts, I mean, one of the things I really tried to find out was like, how good is he at basketball? Because it's so hard. He's the president of the United States.
And they only show the good shots.
Yeah, they only show him like making it and then like walking off. You know what I mean? And like when you're playing pickup with like former D1 guys, like they go easy on you. I mean,
that's
like
also going to serve the purpose of the association thing. Which
totally.
Is that, hey, I'm out here with Chris Paul.
Exactly.
So it's going to look better.
Exactly. I mean, that's my contention. Like as a low D3 at best prospect in basketball. Like if I played with Chris Paul, if I was on a team with Chris Paul, I'd get like 5 open shots and I'd make 2 of them.
In the corner and hit some corner threes.
I mean, that's why those guys are so good.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So I think he benefited from that, but it was always hard to know. For his 40. It was his 46th birthday. I could be wrong. Maybe it was his 48th birthday. One of his birthdays in the 40s, he has all those NBA guys, and they play pickup.
Yeah.
And like Joe Noah's there because of the Chicago connection, and Chris Paul is there, and Kobe's not playing, but like halfway through, Kobe calls Chris Paul over. This is in the book, and he's like, I'm quoting Kobe here. He's like, "You're gonna let this motherfucker walk all over you?" Like what are you doing? Like, you're one of the meanest sons of bitches in the NBA, and you're going to let this guy, and then from then on, like, obviously Chris Paul tries and Obama doesn't score. You know what I mean? Like, it's a different level of thing.
Yeah.
But I love that story of like, because it's so telling about Kobe.
Yeah.
Just so competitive.
It's a very Kobe thing.
Like, very competitive, like, not willing to give an inch. But I think Obama is if you're picking a pickup team, he's probably like a 3rd, 4th, or 5th pick. You know what I mean? He's not number 1 pick, but he's certainly not the last pick.
Not a liability.
No, he's not a liability at all. He doesn't play anymore because he's worried about getting like blowing out his Achilles,
which is look.
Yes, not great. And Michelle Obama was very against him playing during the campaigns, which he would play all the time because they were always worried he was going to get like elbowed in the face or get a tooth knocked out or something.
Yeah.
Which never wound up happening. Axelrod told me this story about how they were playing pickup one time and he like accidentally clotheslined him.
Yeah.
But Obama got up and was fine. But yeah, so he only plays golf now.
Well, shit, I've been on a field with Tom Brady in practice, and it's like, don't touch that guy. Like, don't even run by him.
Right. Don't get anywhere near him.
I wonder who's got the red jersey on more, like Tom Brady or Obama. You talked about golf, and obviously that's been. I mean, when it comes to sports, when you think about presidents, as far as them actually playing a sport, that's number one.
That's the through line.
In my head.
They all played it.
And Eisenhower, when he came into office, this isn't how it was.
No. What's interesting, again, it's hard because it's so long ago, but like, when Eisenhower comes in office, we've just won World War II.
Yeah.
People have two things exist that didn't exist before World War II: the suburbs and free time.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but and the third thing, which is like people have a little bit of money.
Yeah.
Extra money. So Eisenhower sort of, I think, guides Eisenhower and Arnold Palmer together, sort of guide the country into what you do with your leisure time and your leisure money.
Right.
Because people don't know. They've been living in cities. We've been fighting a world war, been fighting the Nazis. You know what I mean? Like, they were focused on other stuff, understandably. Eisenhower plays a lot of golf.
Yeah.
Like, I always roll my eyes when people talk about how much golf Trump and Obama played, because comparatively, Eisenhower played 5 times as much
golf. It was
golf.
like 1,000 days.
1,000 days. I mean, it's again, you talk about like Nixon probably couldn't get elected president now because he's so socially awkward. Like, Eisenhower could never play as much golf as he did. Even as a military hero, he couldn't play as much golf as he did. I mean, he plays a stunning amount. But yeah, I think he in some ways like teaches people what it's like to live in the suburbs, green space. This is a pastime the president of the United States partakes. You should try it. And the golf boom dates exactly toward the Eisenhower presidency. And again, he and Palmer are really good friends. Palmer's from Pennsylvania. Palmer is much more of a blue collar guy than had ever played golf before. It was very much the like an elitist sport and had that whiff to it. Palmer is like a blue collar guy, popular with factory workers, and golf becomes a big deal in blue collar circles. Like there are factory worker leagues and stuff, all because I think of Eisenhower and Palmer together, and they're really good friends. Palmer speaks in front of Congress about Eisenhower after Eisenhower dies. He and his wife vacation with Eisenhower. I mean, they're friendly.
Yeah.
The other thing that's interesting about Eisenhower is, Augusta is not really Augusta when Eisenhower becomes president. Like, it's a popular club, but like, it's not what we think of it now, like the world's most exclusive club. I mean, maybe other than owning an NFL team, the world's most exclusive club.
Right.
And a lot of that is Eisenhower. He goes there all the time. He has they build him a cabin there, still there.
Really?
He paints while he's there. He plays golf.
There was a tree named after him.
There's a tree that he wanted taken down. I mean, this I love this about Augusta. So on the 17th hole, there's no longer, in 2002, I think, there was a freeze in Georgia and it killed the tree. But for years, there's a tree on 17 in the middle of the fairway that Eisenhower hits like constantly. And he's an okay golfer. He's not a great golfer. He's an okay golfer. And he petitions Augusta to have the tree taken down. Now, reminder, he's the sitting president of the United States.
Yeah.
And they're like, no.
Yeah, you can't.
We're not going to do that.
Yeah.
We're not going to change that.
Some things are bigger than that.
I mean, so I guess it speaks to the power of Augusta. But yeah, I mean, Eisenhower makes golf a thing that is okay to do in this country and that people do, which is very different than before he came in office.
Did I hear this correctly that he had a heart attack on the course?
Yes. It's crazy. So it was the 50s. I always, let me a couple pieces of the story you'll think like, this could never happen. It's the 50s. I think it's 53. He takes a several month vacation.
Several months.
Yes, several month from August to October. He takes a several month vacation to Colorado where he plays golf. On one of these trips, he usually plays 36 a day. I mean, again, this guy's a golf addict.
Obviously.
He's walking. Yes. 36 a day.
Good shape.
So he's a trim guy.
High altitude.
Yeah, exactly. Training for at altitude. He is playing, he's on like the 6th or the 7th hole, and his Secretary of State, a guy named John Foster Dulles, who the airport is named after, John Foster Dulles, is trying to get in touch with him. Again, it's the 50s, so he's not like calling his cell phone. He's like calling somebody who then comes out in the course and says like, he needs to talk to you. And Eisenhower is super pissed because he doesn't want to be bothered on the golf course. And there's a doctor who's with him, who's either playing with him or just with him because he's the president. And the doctor says like, you can see the veins popping out on Eisenhower's neck when Foster Dulles' name gets mentioned. He's just like super pissed. So at the turn, again, this was the 50s. He has a hamburger with onions and bacon, like because whatever, that's what you ate back then. Eisenhower was not on like a keto diet, and second 9, Foster Dulles is still bugging the shit out of him, and he's just annoyed. He's like, what the. So they eventually talk, and Eisenhower views Foster Dulles as just being a pain in the ass, like wasting his time. Like, why did you? Like, I'm trying to play golf. Like, couldn't this have waited effectively? So he gets to 18, and he's not feeling good. He thinks he has indigestion. So rather than play another 18, he just plays another 9. I mean, the guy's a golf addict. Like, most of us would be like, all right, 18 is fine. I don't feel good. We'll pack it in. So he's on the 8th hole, his 26th hole of the day. When he's really not feeling well, he goes back to the setup, the Western White House that they have set up. So the press corps is told at the time he just has indigestion. And again, it's the 50s. Your ability to, there was no Twitter to be like, Eisenhower looked weak on the golf course. There's none of that. At 2:00 in the morning, they call the doctor in, and they realize he had had a heart attack earlier in the day on the golf course. And they have to now, why is this interesting? I mean, a couple reasons, but one big one is there's no 25th Amendment. So there's no presidential succession.
Right. Yeah.
So Nixon is the vice president, but it's not clear that Nixon would get the gig if Eisenhower was incapacitated. Who would decide that Eisenhower was incapacitated? You know what I mean? There's no process in place. All that stuff comes with Kennedy and his assassination. All that stuff comes a decade later. It winds up not mattering because Eisenhower never loses consciousness. He winds up recuperating for several months at his farm in Pennsylvania, and everything he goes and serves 2 terms. He dies his heart is bad, and he dies of heart condition later in life of heart failure, and he's not old. But yeah, it's crazy to me like that it happened, that it was at least partly the result of his Secretary of State bugging the crap out of him. But yeah, I mean, certainly the closest we've come, other than Reagan's assassination, to a president dying in office.
And he was a good poker player as well.
He was really into cards. He played poker. He earned enough money playing poker to buy his Mamie, his future wife's ring. That's what paid for that ring, his poker winnings. Yeah. He gets really into after. I don't know why he switches, but he's a very good poker player. But after college, after the Navy, he switches to, or the Army, excuse me, he switches to bridge and gets really, really into bridge and plays bridge at like before a bunch of battles of World War II, like it's a way to calm himself down. And talk about how you can go deep on anything. So I type in like Eisenhower. I'm just like interested like that he played bridge. So I type in Eisenhower and bridge into Google, like as part of like years ago when I'm doing the research for the book. And there's all these great articles written by guys who work for like the War College, the Naval War College, and you know they're like military historians. That bridge is the game that most approximates war. In that I don't really play, but like you have to signal to the guy on your team across from you, and like how much do you tell them, because that then gives information to your opponent sitting across from you, and you know you can bluff and give your the guy with you bad information so that they take that bad information, but just that the strategery, if you will,
somewhere else
totally is very similar in it, which I thought was totally fascinating.
I like that SNL allusion to the strategery.
Strategery, thank you. Yeah, I do what I can. Unfortunately, I usually say it. I've been saying it more than strategy lately. But yeah, so he gets really into bridge, and the whole like bridge as war training is totally interesting to me. And there's tons of great stuff. There's some stuff in the book, but there's a ton of great stuff about it.
So where was it, you know, like with gambling in the presidency? I mean, like were these guys gamblers? They were playing, and who were at the tables gambling with them? Any interesting people, or just other political
types largely? Again, I think the presidency is a very insulated life. And so you're not putting a ton of trust in people from the outside. You know, it's like Obama. Who was Obama's friendship inner circle? The people he had been friends with for decades. Because it's like, you know, adding new friends when you're the president is
loaded
totally
acquisition.
Yeah, you just don't know what they want from you. You know, you want to be with people who you've known forever. So it's usually those kind of people. But I do think they were, particularly with golf, really into gambling because, again, to get back to where we started, these are competitive as hell people. You know what I mean? Like these are people who are like really into competition, into winning, into beating people. There's a great story. I love this story about Bush, the elder Bush. So Jim Nance and the elder Bush are very tight.
Right?
Very tight. Like Nance is like an unofficial son. Like they very closer than I talked to Nance for the book, and like closer than I knew. Nance is playing golf one time with Bush. It's like one of the first times he ever played with him, and he's like, Bush is proposing the bet. And he's like $1 a hole or something. And Nance is like very hesitant because he doesn't know if like $1 means like $1,000. You know what I mean? Like, and he realizes over time that Bush means like legit $1. So like, you know, the most you can lose is $18. He's a former president of the United States. You know, he's got money. But I love that story about Bush because he was, you know, like if you're looking for a good sport, if you want your kid, you want to find somebody who like you can point to as who was a president who was a good sport and a pretty good athlete, like George H.W. Bush is the guy.
What about sports gambling? Was there any trace of guys betting on game?
Not really, but I think.
Who would be most likely if you?
Nixon for sure. I mean, I hate to keep saying Nixon, but like he was just the most into sports. And like as we learned, he had like a degeneracy. He had a movable line as it related to legality. To put it nicely. Nixon. I think part of the issue was, like sports gambling then versus sports gambling
you had to
now.
have
I
a
mean,
bookie.
now it's like, it's on your phone. Take 2 seconds. You can bet on it, whether the pitch is a ball or a strike. Back
Are
then.
you allowed to gamble as a president, like from a legality standpoint?
It's a good question that I don't know the answer to. I would say in practical terms, it doesn't matter because there's no way in hell you can.
Yeah.
Like whether you would legally be, there may not be a legal ruling on whether, it's not like professional sports where like you can't gamble on like professional sports. You work for the NFL, you can't gamble on the NFL. I don't know if there's a specific law or rule about it, but there's no way in hell any president would be caught gambling.
No.
I mean, I think they even downplay.
Biden wouldn't know how to work draft.
Right, exactly. They even downplay now, like that they bet on golf.
Yeah,
because I think it's funny because gambling is such a huge part now of. But I think for presidents, there's still an element of like, it's not something that a president wants to be involved in.
Since we're on vices, I just have to ask.
Yeah.
I mean, did any of them smoke?
My vices?
Smoke marijuana?
Yes, Bill Clinton.
I mean, yeah, but he didn't inhale. Right.
None. I mean, Obama has admitted to doing cocaine.
Okay.
Bill Clinton pot. Beyond that, not really.
W. Bush cocaine, right?
W. Bush cocaine. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. When he was like in his drinking days.
At least 20 years ago,
Yes,
or whatever
right.
the quote was.
I think that's probably it. Now, admitted to versus did is a whole.
Choked up George Bush.
That's a whole.
Fucking hilarious.
You know what's interesting about Bush is so he's real into endurance sports.
Yeah.
Younger Bush, I should say,
Yeah.
W. Bush. He's real into endurance sports, mountain biking, running, and there's a great story of for his 40th birthday he gets hammered. This is when he was still drinking, and he goes out and running the next day, and he basically has this revelation. According to him, he has this revelation about. Like, I can't keep doing this. Like, I got to choose one or the other.
I've had those many times, but then,
sweating it out.
But then you go
sweating
back.
it out, you go back. He did not go back.
Yeah.
I do think there is Bush younger has an addictive personality for sure. And I think he uses running. I think he does these like mountain bike when he's president. They mountain bike in 110 degree heat in Crawford, Texas. I think he uses that as a substitute, like for his addictive personality.
Right.
I think it's like it's a stand-in for drinking,
a lot of people
drugs.
do, yeah.
It's his way to sort of cope, and he makes a big thing out of it. And he brings a treadmill on Air Force One. I mean, he's like real.
Really?
He's real committed to running.
No way.
So like when they're flying to Japan or whatever for some meetings, he's like running on Air Force One.
Do they all sit there on Sundays and watch games?
I think it depends who it is.
NFL fans?
Let's
probably
see.
have Red Zone, these guys.
I would say Biden probably not.
Yeah.
I don't think he's a huge fan.
He claims to be an Eagles fan.
Yeah, he's ostensibly an Eagles fan, right?
He has to be.
Right. I don't think he has a choice given where he's from. And his wife is like a legit Eagles fan.
Yeah.
Obama, yes, for sure. Obama's into sports, likes sports, watches Sports Center, watches Pardon the Interruption, is into sports. Bush younger, yes. Bush elder, yes. Nixon for sure.
And then before that, there's really
there's not like Sports Center.
Yeah.
You're watching like Warner Wolf do highlights. You know what I mean? Like it's but yeah, those guys, I think yes. I think Biden is and Trump. By the way, I skipped Trump. Trump for sure.
Yeah.
Trump is very into sports.
Yeah.
Trump, whether it's trying to own teams or just follow it, he's very into sports and watches a ton of golf.
So let's dive into Trump and sports because, like in my experience as an athlete, we definitely overlapped on some issues and the White House and that sort of thing. But his first foray really into professional sports was the USFL.
Yeah. So USFL is really interesting. And if you've not read it, there's a book by a guy named Jeff Pearlman.
Yeah, I know Jeff.
Our friend.
Love him.
Friend of the program.
Love him. Yeah. He's got a new book about Bo Jackson. Which I'm psyched for.
Yep.
He actually, I did a book festival this weekend. He read like 2 in front of me, so I missed it, which I was pissed about because I don't know him.
So like Bo didn't want to talk to him because Bo doesn't talk to people. Like Bo, for one thing, he's got the hiccup.
That's right. He's still got But Bo doesn't talk to people.
Well,
he doesn't do like press.
He's quieter, and I think when Perlman was going to write a book that looked like an autobiography, but it wasn't quite because Bo wasn't
didn't
giving
write
him
it.
the access. it wasn't like an anti-Perlman or an anti-book thing. It was just like, hey, I'm not interested. But I remember Jeff was like, hey, can you talk to your dad and see if Bo will...
Oh, right. I didn't even think of that.
I was like, I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm looking forward to reading that.
Yeah. So anyway, his book about the USFL, there's so much good Trump stuff in it.
Yeah.
And it's so telling. And I cribbed a bunch of it for my, with credit, but for my book. So Trump gets into the USFL ostensibly because he wants to support a league that is an alternative to the NFL and they play in the spring.
Yeah.
And there's these quotes from him as he gets in, like, I don't think that we should compete with the NFL. Like, fall football that's their thing. Mm-hmm. This is before the NFL is the juggernaut that it is today, right? I think that's probably fair. You might know better than me. But, like, and the NFL is still a big deal.
It's very viable, but this is an immovable object.
Right. Like, the idea now, it's like the USFL and the XFL are not like, we're going to take the NFL down.
No, we're just going to catch the scrap.
Exactly right. Yeah. So the USFL, I think, was positioned to be a more credible alternative at the time. Mm-hmm. So Trump comes in and he is told by Pete Rozelle, the commissioner at the time, he wants an NFL team badly. He wants a New York NFL team or New Jersey. And he's told by Pete Rozelle, you will never have a team. You know, Rozelle just doesn't like him. Doesn't want him involved. Doesn't think he's the kind of person who should be involved.
Good instincts.
Trump, of course.
All right, Pete.
Trump hears that as, so you're saying there's a chance. You know what I mean? Like classic Trump. Like here's whatever he wants to hear. So he spends the next 6 to 9 months essentially trying to convince all the USFL owners that what he has just said, which is competing with the NFL is non-viable, to we need to compete with the NFL or we're a joke league. Like that your legacy is going to be you were a beta, essentially, that you were on the second tier league. The whole thing is entirely cooked up so that Trump can get an NFL team. His theory is we compete against them. The NFL eventually kind of capitulates and says, we'll take a few of these teams in and the rest of you will go bankrupt, but we'll take a few of these teams in and one of them will be the New Jersey Generals, Donald Trump's team, Doug Flutie, Herschel Walker.
Yeah. Like what happened with the ABA.
Like with the ABA and the NBA. Yeah. Exactly right. So that's his working theory. But what he does is he winds up driving it into... They sue the NFL over antitrust issues, the USFL. Essentially, it's a monopoly.
Yeah, okay.
You know, like you can't control the entire sport through this one organization, this one privately held organization, blah, blah. They win, but it's... The lawyer for the NFL, there's quotes about this in the book, and they're from Perlman's book. The lawyer for the NFL essentially makes Trump the whipping boy for the USFL. He puts Trump out as like the guy. Like, you want this guy? And so even though the USFL wins the case, they win $1 in the settlement, which, because they've switched to the fall, bankrupts them. And so the USL ceases to exist. So, like, there's a real case to be made that Donald Trump bankrupts the USFL.
It sounds like he did.
The USFL is, like, at that time viable as a spring league. They're getting crowds. They're in Birmingham. They're in Tampa Bay. Like, they're in a lot of places where the USFL now is. But, they had Herschel Walker, Heisman Trophy. There were real... It wasn't like it is now where you're like, I've never heard of any of the guys on these teams. Yeah. There were real people in the USFL. Not a ton, but enough. There was some star power. And Trump just drives it into the ground because he thinks despite Rozelle telling him he'll never get a team, he thinks he's getting a team.
And also a well-known cheater in golf.
Yeah, so Rick Riley has literally written the book on this. It's called Commander in Cheat, which is a great title. If you have not read it, I would recommend you read it. Right. So Trump, my favorite sort of Trump cheating has to do with club championships.
Yes. So
he is claimed to win, I think it's like 13 by this point, 13 club championships. Like 4 senior, these are all at Mar-a-Lago, like 4 senior championships and 9 like legit like regular championships. So I asked all these people, like, how the hell does he do this? Because like many things with Donald Trump, he is actually a quite good golfer. He's not as good as he says he is.
Yeah, you're right.
He's like a 6 or an 8 handicap. Like he's good for a 76-year-old.
Yep.
And I talked to this guy, who works for Golf Magazine, and he said, like, you can tell that Trump spends all of his time focused on hitting drives far. That's his mark
Sounds
of a good,
right,
that's
yeah.
his mark of a good golfer. Which, like, could that be any more on brand?
Yeah, that sounds
you know
right.
what I mean? Like, he didn't care about the chipping and putting. Don't worry about all that stuff. Like, focus on the hitting it far. And actually, like a month or two ago, he's at Turnberry in Scotland, and he hits a drive, allegedly 280. And he turns to the press and he says, "You think Biden could hit a drive 280?" Which is just like so. Biden also, by the way, a pretty good golfer. Doesn't play anymore.
The answer is no.
But no. I'm not sure Trump hit it 280.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah.
so I'm talking to all these people about the club championships thing because it just strikes me as weird.
Yeah.
And they say there's two basic ways that Trump wins club championships. One, he buys the club, plays the first round, and declares himself the club champion, which, you know, like anyone who's a member of a country club or been to a country club knows that's not how that works. Or two, he finds out what the club champion shot to win. And if he ever shoots below that, he declares in any round, not in a tournament format, in any round, he declares himself the champion. So this past year, he said that he won the senior championship at Mar-a-Lago. And I was like, I couldn't figure out why. Like, something was like itching at me, and I couldn't figure out like what I was trying to remember. And I remembered it's a 2-day tournament, a Saturday and a Sunday. The Saturday, he was at an event in South Carolina, like doing a political event, like a much publicized political event. So I was like, how the hell did that happen? And what happened was that people show up the next day. They played the first round. They show up the next day, and Trump's name is at the top of the leaderboard, despite the fact that he hadn't been there. And they're like, that's sort of odd. And what he did is he used a score that he had shot like 2 weeks prior and said, "This is my first round." And so he used that score and then went on to win. So again, it's like, you know, a bunch of them. Bill Clinton cheated at golf. You know, he'd move his billigans, like he'd hit a bunch of mulligans. Lyndon Johnson, like, just talk about not giving a shit. Lyndon Johnson would just hit like 8 or 9 balls at one time, like literally just didn't care.
Didn't cup.
Like, just could care less. Like, didn't matter who he was playing with. It was just balls everywhere. Like, until he hit one he liked. But Trump's is like really well thought out. It's not like, oh, winner rules, kick the ball like 4 feet. I mean, I think he does that too. It's like deep psychological stuff. But yeah, he definitely cheats at golf.
And he said he was a pro-level baseball player, but supposedly people looked up his...
Totally right. So he has said many times over he was the best high school baseball player in New York, which is just like simply not true.
Just like the lie is just wild.
Yeah, like it just best baseball player in New York.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a bunch of his box scores publicly available. I talked to people who played with him. He's a super aggressive. Again, like none of this will surprise you at all. Like as in sports, as in life, right? He's a super aggressive hitter who's big. I mean, he's big. Trump is like 6'3", 6'4". He's like a big guy. Pretty good hitter. Played first base. Didn't ever really care about fielding or anything like that. But the idea that he is the best baseball player in New York is just like totally.
Batting average was what, like 200?
Two something.
Yeah.
Like, he is clearly not the best baseball player in New York. Again, it's not that he's not a good baseball player. He's like a pretty serviceable high school baseball player.
Just be like all the other presidents and just be a pretty good athlete.
Right. He's a pretty good
He's
a pretty good athlete who's a very good golfer, I would say. But he's obsessed with winning and always being the best.
But not actually winning.
Correct.
So when we won, and we won the Super Bowl in New England in 2016 and then Philly in 2017, I had ruffled some feathers because I didn't go to the White House because I don't like him, you know, and who's to say, I don't know if I've ever said this publicly, I don't know that he'd be the only president that I'd skip because I'm just not terribly politically inclined for a lot of the reasons we've talked about because a lot of the people, you know, hosting you are not people you'd want in your circle.
And they're using your fame and your celebrity. I mean, that's the other thing you got to realize.
They're using you.
They're there because they think it's good for them.
And the general public...
They're not doing it out of the kindness of their heart.
Yeah, and the general public, hook, line, and sinker, is like, this is a real opportunity. It's a special event. You can go eat McDonald's at the White House.
Yeah, right. Burger King, Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, and that kind of spiraled a little bit. I can remember the second year... There were a core group of us who weren't going in Philly.
I remember the Eagles.
And it was kind of a developing thing. And like to take people inside behind the curtain, like we held a meeting, myself, Malcolm, and a bunch of guys who weren't going. We were like, listen, no one's going to judge you if you go. This is just our personal, this is where we stand, and we're not going to go to the White House. But we don't want you to think as leaders of this team that, like, if somebody goes to the White House, we still recognize the tremendous opportunity.
Right.
We're not going to.
You're not going to be like, I can't believe you did that.
Banned. Yeah,
right.
But the guys decided that, hey, we're not going. I don't think people felt terribly inclined to go anyways. And then on top of it, the political climate was a big turnoff.
Yeah, this was 2017.
2017.
Yeah.
And in the midst of all that, there were protests, there were protesting players, there was the Charlottesville deal, which hit close to home for me. So if anybody's wondering, besides the debates where I kind of made up my mind on this guy, like that was where for me I was like, oh, fuck.
That's right, because Charlottesville had happened.
Yeah, I mean,
August of 2017.
I was in training camp for the Eagles, and I can remember sitting in my car and thinking, here we are. We're in such need of a calming voice, not Kingsford on the fire here. Like
Homer Simpson on the barbecue.
We got the Homer Simpson on the barbecue, and I was just so disappointed. And long story short, all that culminates, with these protesting players, and I can remember to get these sons of bitches off the field and the whole thing. Needless to say, as an athlete, I wasn't a fan of him. As a person, I wasn't a fan of him. But we weren't the first group that didn't go to the White House.
Nope.
I mean, there was Tim Thomas.
Tim Thomas, goalie for the Bruins.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And there was Matt Burke, I believe. I don't want to slander him.
And Larry Bird.
Larry Bird in '83.
Who
did he skip?
Reagan.
Yeah.
And there's a quote in the book which is remarkable to me. I don't know that he did. Tim Thomas was definitely for political reasons.
Yes.
I don't know if Bird skipped for political reasons. I don't think he did. He's not super political. But the quote in the book is amazing. He says, if Reagan wants me, he knows where to find me, which is like an amazing quote,
beautiful.
like pretty ballsy.
That's beautiful.
And in fact, you guys weren't even the first team because the Warriors, Steph Curry, had won in 2016.
Yes.
And Steph had said, I'm not going.
Yes.
And Trump did this very similar thing that he did with the Eagles. The next day he said, well, you're not invited.
Yes.
And he did the same thing with the Eagles. It was like when a clear number were not going, he said, you're disinvited.
That was the funniest shit in the world.
I mean, but it was like, you know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of my 8th grade girlfriend where I was like, I got word that she was going to break up with me. So I was calling her to try to break up with her first.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You're dumped.
I did that with my current wife in college, and it actually worked out. Like, we got back together. But that's the oldest trick in the book. But the bottom line is, that White House thing has become and will continue to become a lightning rod.
Especially if he's back in the White House.
I mean, there's going to be this whole song and dance every year. And I just wonder where you think that whole thing's going.
I do think I think it's your perspective is probably useful on this. So I wonder what you think. But I still remember Michael Jordan was asked why he didn't take political positions.
Yeah.
And he said, very famously, like, Republicans buy sneakers too. Right.
Yeah.
Fast forward from that to LeBron wearing an I Can't Breathe warm-up shirt.
Yeah.
So to you guys saying, you know what, like, we're not going to just go.
Yeah.
I don't agree with the guy. I'm not going to be seen with the guy. Yeah. Like, and it's a personal choice. Like, I'm not saying the whole team shouldn't go.
Yeah.
I'm personally not going to go. I think that athletes have realized their political power in ways in the last, call it 10 to 15 years, that we are in much more of an athlete age than we were 20 or 30 years ago when it was like, well, if the owner says you have to go, then you have to go. So it was like indentured servitude versus now you realize the power that you have as a professional athlete.
I also believe, and I keep coming back to social media on a lot of issues, and I think it's bad in a lot of ways, and it's accelerating our course for like a collision here in this country.
Yep.
But as athletes, I think the access to all your fans, the vehicle to deliver your point of view, which everybody else has.
Of course, you're a human being on Earth.
Like a carpenter can talk about politics, but I can't because carpentry is somehow more elevated in the arena.
You being good at sports is not a disqualifier.
It's not disqualifying. And I don't think my opinion is any better than anybody else, but when I had access to it, I would voice things, and as time goes on, you naturally just become embroiled in all these conversations because you have that access point. And I think as time goes on, that shapes your opinion on what you do in scenario A or B.
Of course, how you behave.
Because you're in those conversations, and your conversations are more visible. And I do think social media and athletes having a vehicle to get their point across gives them equity in certain spaces that will dictate their movements in the future. And so, like, for me, if I'm going to talk about certain things, then I can't be doing certain things that are, I don't know what the word would be, that counter my positions. And so, like,
right, you got to behave in a certain way.
You got to stand on what you believe in. And I think the more athletes talk about what they believe in, then their actions are going to follow in some direction. But I don't think every athlete has realized or is interested in the power that no. And so I think, Michael Jordan, if he played today, might still take a Michael Jordan stance. And I have no problem with that. I think one of the biggest issues we had during the last couple of years when it became really prominent that athletes were speaking out is this attitude of, if you don't say something, you're complicit,
right.
which is, and I'm sure at some point I've echoed that sentiment in a clumsy way or whatever, but I do believe that if you have something to say, you should say it. If you don't. Not everybody
has that take
in this game.
Right. Not everybody. Right.
And for me, it wasn't political. For me, it was about how he made me feel as an American. Because at the end of the day, I'm still an American, and I want to have pride in where I grew up and where I live and where I raised my kids. And he did not make me feel proud, and he still doesn't. Now, that's not to say that Clinton did. I was a kid. It's not to say that George Bush and some of the missteps he had made me proud. It's not to say that I agree with everything Obama ever did. But what it is to say is that guy he made my skin crawl, and I'm not going to be in a room with him the year that we reached
right to celebrate height. Something that you
that's not something I want to share with the guy.
Right.
And I do think it's complicated, and I think sports and politics will continue to intersect, but I do think that athletes should feel that they have a choice. You don't have to get in these arenas.
But I do think some of this is Trump, but I do think athletes have become more politicized. I think people look to athletes more now than ever before for their opinions on stuff. And I think you're right. I mean, I think it's like athletes are no different than the rest. They happen to be better at sports, but they're no different than the rest of the culture. Some people are really interested in politics.
Yes.
Some people, I mean, I'm sure your teammates, some of them just don't care.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's like people I run into on the street. Some people are like, I watch you on MSNBC and I subscribe to your newsletter, and I love those people.
Yeah.
Like, don't get me wrong, those people are great.
The political junkies.
But there's lots of people, including people I'm related to, like my wife, who's like passively interested, kind of, because of what I do for a living. But, and it's like, but I do think that we are in an age, and I think it's a good thing, where athletes have started to realize their own power more. And it is social media, you have direct access, right? You don't have to like go through the team to release a statement or anything like that.
You cut the middleman out.
Right. But I think that's a good thing, because I think we did live for a long time in this like indentured servitude vibe where you worked for the team, you were a company man, and if you weren't a company man, they got rid of you.
Yeah.
And like, to me, that is incredibly short-sighted and unfair to the players, in that you don't give up your presence as a citizen of the country and as of the world because you're good at sports.
No, that sounds like
what I mean? Like, no one, it's to your point, nobody expects that out of any other profession.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? It's not like, oh, you're an architect. Well, you certainly can't have an opinion on Trump versus Biden.
Yeah.
Like, no one expects that.
Yeah.
And these are people with real platforms and real followings.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's hard. It's probably hard for some of them who are like Tom Brady. Doesn't strike me as terribly political.
No.
But Trump tried to rope him in.
Not political. They threw the hat on.
Right. Right. Just doesn't get it.
The ironic part
what
is
it means.
like we associate Tom with all these ideals that that probably are very conservative, and he's a Trump fan, but more often than not, like in a situation,
just happened to be there and somebody handed him a hat.
He was playing golf with Trump. And the thin line with Trump was 5 years ago, you could rub elbows with Trump. I could be on, what's the show where he fires everybody?
The Apprentice.
Or he's on Celebrity Roast. You've got these comedians who are now, they're left-leaning and they hate Trump, but 5 years ago. And that just reinforces the fact that, like, everything's okay until you're running the country.
So you're the actual president of the United States.
The ledge that somebody like Tom Brady might not have identified was that, hey, that was his hat, which didn't exist before he was running, but his gear, his association.
Yeah, playing with him, playing in a foursome with him.
It just changed very fast.
Yeah.
And I think for people who, like Tom, who are maybe at best naive in that, did not make the association.
No.
Now, I'm not caping for Tom if he disagrees with me, but what I am saying is that sometimes we get overly focused on those little connections.
Belichick is the same way. It's like, oh, Belichick is a Trump guy. It's like, I don't
know about that.
Not
and then
sure
after
that
January
that's true.
6th, everybody
and I
kept
think
their
that
distance.
now I think it's a good thing that athletes have a microphone now because you can clear it up.
You can
say like, look, this is my, and Brady has done that.
Yeah.
Like he's come out and said like, look, I'm not super political. I'm not like, I think he's more focused on like growing his own business and brand than he is on like the country, which again, by the way, is his right.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like that's
his freedom. And,
that's his.
And I think one thing that I did want to mention, thinking through this as an exercise, like, is it good or bad for athletes to have this entry point? Like, there's a lot of black athletes in this country who, unfortunately, if you look at industries where we have representation from people in different neighborhoods, different backgrounds than me or you, like a lot of those foremost representatives are in sports.
Yep.
And so, like, you want to go to Hollywood? Well, it's just a bunch of white people. And, you want to go to the business world? Like, well, we've gate-kept a lot of these industries. And, I think when it comes to athletics, like, we are going to be disproportionately represented by a lot of African-American, leaders in the NFL. And, like, it's 70% black league. So, I think having that entry point for a white athlete's a little bit different, I think, in white America than for like black America, who's looking at some of these guys and gals like, well, you're what we got. We need your voice.
Right. And you're a leader in the community.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that there aren't great black leaders in other industries, but I do think like the diversity factor that we have in the NFL and in the NBA, like, all right, you want to hear how the rest of America lives? These guys and gals grew up in different situations, and so I think their voice is more needed.
And I actually think LeBron is a really good example of that. Like someone who gets it, like gets the fact that, the famous Dennis Rodman, like I'm nobody's role model. Like I think LeBron gets, or maybe that was Barkley. Barkley, right? Which is so funny now that it was Barkley because I think he gets it much more. Right, he gets it much more now. But I think LeBron like intuitively sort of understands the role that he is to play. And I mean, again, I think I just contrast, and they're different people. To your point, they're different people. But I do contrast like what LeBron has said and done and the positions he's taken on political issues, including on Trump. Versus like what Jordan did. I mean, Jordan was sort of a non-factor during the Reagan administration by his own admission. Now, it may just be they're different people. And if LeBron had been around back then, maybe he would have been taken. But I do think there is this understanding that you have the ability now, and in some cases, the responsibility to speak out. And again, we live in a sort of monoculture now. I mean, that's part of what the book is about. Like it used to be, it was like, I don't want my politics and my sports to mix. You know what I mean? Like if you're a good athlete, I don't want to hear about sports. If you're a politician, I don't want to hear, I don't want to hear about politics. If you're a good politician, I don't want to hear about sports. And I think we now live in this monoculture where it's like pop culture, sports, politics, it's all in the same lane. Like there's no silos anymore. It's all in the same lane. Politicians have views about sports. Athletes have views about politics. And so I actually think that's a good thing. I think this sort of siloed thing was like unfair to the average person who has a variety of interests. There's nobody you meet who's like, if the only thing you could ever talk about was your professional football playing days, you'd be a boring guy. No one would listen to this podcast.
Right, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, if all I could talk about was politics,
Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon would have listened.
He would have listened. He would have loved it. But if all I could talk about was politics, or all I cared about was politics, like it's fine. But most people are a little bit more nuanced than that.
No question.
And they have a variety of interests. And I think this at least recognizes sports and politics are not so different. The same kind of people are drawn to it. The same kind of traits succeed. The same kind of people watch it and consume it.
Also, what we deem as political, as far as a topic is concerned, is oftentimes predicated on what's pissing us off. So like politics have been a part of sports for many years in a lot of ways, maybe not as
decades.
Straight line as it is today, but you talk about like some of the military posturing, some of the NFL today, I mean, like with their salute to service stuff, that's inherently a little bit political.
I would say more than a little bit. Yes.
It's a recruiting tool. They're paying, there's money being exchanged, the whole thing. I think now it's just we're getting into the nitty gritty of some of the policies. And also we're hearing from people that we haven't heard it from before.
Which is good.
It's a good thing.
I mean, more voices is good.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the problems we suffer from, and like, I still think this is true. I keep coming back to the fact that we are very likely to see an 80-year-old nominee for one party and a 76-year-old nominee for another party, both of whom have run for president multiple times before. I mean, remember, Biden, that was 2000 and this is his third run for president, right? He lost twice before, 88 and 2008.
That book about the 88 election is so good.
What It Takes?
Yeah.
God, it's so good.
I got to read it.
It's Richard Ben Kramer, who wrote a great biography of DiMaggio, too. And was actually, he died, was writing an A-Rod book, which I would have loved to read. But it's called What It Takes. It's about the 88 campaign. If you want to know about, just what I would recommend to people is like, it's a huge book. It's like a doorstop. It's like, 850 pages.
It's like the Ulysses S. Grant book that Russillo sent me.
Yes.
Yeah,
Didn't he have to drop out for like plagiarism?
He did.
Law school
He had to drop out for plagiarism.
Yeah.
He plagiarized a British politician.
Oh, that's funny.
Named Neil Kinnock.
No way.
Yes. But like, just read the Biden sections.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I mean, first of all, it's amazing that a book written about the 88 campaign is telling in 2023, right? 25 years later, 35 years later.
Yeah.
But the Biden sections are fascinating because Richard Ben Kramer and Biden, the author and Biden, were tight. And so there's so much good Biden stuff in there.
I want to ask you about this because it just popped up and we're talking about Biden with the whole Angel Reese thing. I had a theory. We had a theory that when Jill Biden came out and said, "Hey, Iowa's invited,"
bring them both.
I think they're trying to win Iowa.
Interesting. Could be. I mean, that was always the speculation when Obama would pick brackets. The speculation was always that he would pick like swing states.
Yes, is that
like
you,
UNC?
You subscribe to that theory?
I don't think Iowa is winnable. So I mean, they could be trying, but I don't think it matters.
That was a Hail Mary.
Yeah.
Well, because it was everything in these, we everything online and everything's these political corners, and it almost feels like when there's a sports issue where there's two people or teams, it's like, we're going to go over in this corner, and Iowa was like middle America, white girl, and LSU was this brash young African American woman who's playing the game her way, and playing it like a lot of white athletes played it, but you could feel it. Immediately, it was like, okay, we're going to fight about this, and it's going to be through an identity lens. It's going to be through a political lens.
Pretty big gaffe.
And then when Jill came out and took the other side of that, seemingly, she didn't realize either how inflammatory it was going to be, or she was doing it for those reasons.
I think she probably was like doing the both teams are winners thing. Like, I actually don't.
I'm going to give her too much credit here.
I don't.
With that.
I don't think that there was. I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't think there was a huge amount. She certainly didn't think it was going to create what it created.
Yeah.
I don't think there was a tremendous amount of like planning. I could be wrong about that. I think she amazingly violated two taboos, gender and race, right? Because it's like the whole like, with men, you would never be like, let's bring the losing team in.
It felt like
with girls, it's like, or with the women's team, it's like, well, it's fine. Everybody, we're gonna have orange slices afterward.
Like patronized.
Totally.
If I were Iowa.
Totally, and I get that.
Yeah.
I don't think she meant all of that. I think she was trying. I think she genuinely was like, that was an exciting game to watch. It would be fun.
Not online. If you're online, you have this.
You would know that.
This cynical filtering system for everything that comes into your brain. Like, she would have immediately realized if she had
race and gender. Totally.
Totally. People have been arguing about this all day. Did Barack, when he played pickup with UNC and then they win North Carolina by like a percentage of a
very
point,
close.
Do you think that actually factors in this intentional?
I talked to a guy who wrote a book called The Audacity of Hoop, which is a great name. His contention is that Obama won Iowa, and remember, in that year he won Indiana too.
Barely.
that they played a ton of 3-on-3 games with supporters throughout North Carolina and Indiana, and that made a difference. And look, I can actually buy that in this regard. Obama's biggest struggle was that he was seen as exotic.
Yeah.
Right? He was a guy with a Kenyan father, a white mother from Kansas. He grew up in Hawaii with his grandparents. He lived in Indonesia. Like
everything.
His background is all like foreign, different, other. Right? And
even though he's so fucking normal, he's such an American.
Right. And by the way, I should mention his name is also Barack Hussein Obama. All of those things added up to people being like, I don't know about this guy. And so I can buy that a guy who you can play pickup basketball with. I mean, my contention, I'm sure this is true for you in your life, like sports are very, very revealing. If I need to know what someone's like, if I can play an hour of pickup basketball with them, I could give you a pretty decent sense of what they're like. Might not be perfect, but it'll be close to the mark. I think this idea that Obama, it was like very regular guy. It was like, he plays basketball. He's like us. So look, when you win by 0.1%, who the hell knows what it is that's the thing that puts you over the top? But it can't have hurt. No. I don't think there's any way it hurts. And I think it is. Alexander Wolf is the guy who wrote the book, Audacity of Hoop. And I think he makes a really good point about, like, look, they're the two most basketball crazy states in the country. So it's hard to dismiss the fact that he played a bunch of pickup basketball in these states and he won those states that a Democrat hadn't won in 35, 40 years.
And I've never said this on this podcast. I don't think I've said this publicly, but I met Obama. I got to spend 45 minutes with him. Sat there and talked to him. Me and a couple teammates. This was after he was president. And I got again, I don't agree with every damn thing. So people want to loophole you into all these ideologies, but I just so enjoyed talking to him. He was just so down to earth. He could have a beer with you. He could shoot the shit with you. He could play pickup basketball with you. You could just tell. And I think he had, again, it's like the anti-Nixon. He had that common touch. Clinton had it. George W. Bush had it. It's not one party doesn't dominate it, but and again, I keep coming back to it, but I really do think the ability to talk sports and to understand the role that sports plays in American culture is a part of that. Like Obama very famously would watch Sports Center rather than cable news. Like, that's telling. That's revealing. That's what most people do. Most people are not. I mean, look, you can tell by the cable news ratings. Most people are not watching cable news at night. They're watching something else. They're watching Survivor, or they're watching live sports, or they're watching some show on Netflix. Something to numb my mind, not set it on fire.
Right. Exactly. And I think that he was good. He was very good at coming across, despite his background as an average guy. Which, by the way, we talked about this off camera, but I think it's true. Like, Donald Trump is good at that. People think Donald Trump is a regular guy.
And he does it. It's actually because he's more irregular than Obama.
Much more so.
Identity out of it.
Raised in significant wealth. Father made him $1 million gift as a 20-year-old. Young 20s.
The same people that call me and that scream nepotism because I got drafted number 2 in the draft, which, by the way, you got to earn. They love this guy. I was never given $1 million.
Right.
I've earned everything I have.
Right.
It's just crazy the mental gymnastics people will do to make this work.
They will. And it is remarkable to me. I think the greatest trick Donald Trump ever pulled was in the 2016 election was to make himself the voice of the everyman. Like, it's stunning to me. Like, this is a guy whose whole brand is built on gold, everything. His hotels cost $1,200 a night to stay in. I think a lot of it was aspirational, the appeal. It was like, Trump's pitch was essentially like, I'm rich, I have a good-looking wife, I can say and do whatever I want. Vote for me and you'll be like me. There's definitely that element to it. Like that, and people were like, I want that.
I want the gold.
I want that. I want all that.
I kind of want to finish. We've been all over the place with JFK because it's very interesting, the juxtaposition between this, like, he looks like a jock. He kind of embodies that.
Totally.
But he was essentially, and I don't mean this pejoratively, but he was kind of a cripple by the end of his life because of his back injuries.
So we talked a lot about sports and perception, Reagan and that sort of stuff. JFK is like the classic example of that. So Camelot is obviously a creation, right? This idea that like he and his wife are super happy and they got these great looking kids and they're the all-American family. Sports is a big part of that. So, when you think of JFK, most people, and if I say JFK in sports, they'll either say sailing or they'll say football. Most of them will say touch football.
Yeah.
Most of the time he was like incapacitated.
Right.
He could barely play. He played 1 year at Harvard. And interestingly enough, so he had a really bad back. One of the theories about why his back was so bad is that after a game at Harvard, one of his family friends tackled him from behind jokingly and hurt his back.
Damn.
That's like one of the working theories of why his back was so bad when he was like 20.
I kind of believe in the curse with that family.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard not to when you look at their life.
Oh my God.
So he was infirm.
Yeah.
I mean, like he was not a healthy man. Interestingly enough, JFK is a really good golfer, but they downplay how much golf he plays because they don't want him to be seen as an elitist.
Right.
I mentioned how much Eisenhower played. Kennedy attacks Eisenhower for how much he plays.
Yeah.
So he doesn't want to be seen as a hypocrite, and he also doesn't want to be seen. It's still got that whiff of elitism to it, the sport, despite what Eisenhower and Palmer have tried to do for it. And so he doesn't want to be tied to it, but he's actually a really good golfer. But when you think of JFK, you think of that touch football. Football is certainly at the time and probably still today, more blue collar, more average Joe, more swing state, right? And so it was all, as like a lot of things with Kennedy, it was all a creation designed to appeal to voters, and sports played a role in that.
But he was famously a good swimmer.
He PT 109.
During World War II and after World War II.
Yes. So he swam in college, and a lot of people say that prepared him. I didn't know. So obviously, he was awarded, he was awarded medals of honor for his performance when his boat was sunk.
Yeah.
But I go through it in the book just because I didn't know it, so I figured a lot of people didn't know, like what he actually did.
Yeah.
And it's like pretty remarkable. I mean, it's like 4 or 5 open water swims carrying a guy, no light, middle of the night, trying to dodge the enemy. Like it's a pretty heroic moment. And by the way, that moment makes him as a politician. I mean, like if you read the press clips from after that, it's like he is an American hero. Yeah. It's like a modern day McCain, or back in the days McCain. Yeah. Like he is seen as an American hero for his performance in the war. It leads to the House run, the Senate run. It's at the center of the presidential bid. Yeah. All because he's like a very gifted natural swimmer and swam in college. But yeah, I look at that section in the book because I was stunned at.
I did.
It's crazy, right? Like,
but what's up with the pool?
Oh yeah, he definitely in the White House. There's a pool in the White House. He definitely used that for less noble reasons. He would invite lady friends who were not his wife to the pool to swim. Got caught. Found out his wife was coming down. They sprint out of there. There's like footprints going out. I mean, it's like. Exactly what everything.
There wasn't an understanding with her.
I don't think so.
He was in trouble.
Certainly not in that episode.
He was perpetually in trouble.
Yes. And again, talk about someone who couldn't do what he did now.
Yeah.
Like it should be impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, he just like his behavior was so like out there.
Well, yeah.
With women,
and he's so revered.
It's remarkable, but it's perception.
Yeah.
This is what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
It's like how these guys model perception. It's like people think Ronald Reagan was a good athlete because he's photographed with a lot of good athletes.
Yes.
And like, man, if osmosis made you a great athlete, I'd be a great athlete.
Yeah.
Like I'd just hang out with a great athlete and have it rub off on me. It's not how it works.
Yeah. You're at the wrong podcast.
So like, it's all perception. Ford is perceived as like this clumsy oaf. Ford was a great athlete.
Yeah.
He was a Division I college football player.
Yeah.
At the University of Michigan, like a real school, real place. So yeah, I just think that it is sports plays into the way in which we perceive who these guys are in really powerful ways. They play a role in determining it too, because they get it.
Yeah.
Especially now, they get the role that sports can play. And yeah, you're being manipulated at some level. I mean, that's the art of politics, is manipulation and persuasion. Persuasion, putting it nicely; manipulation, putting it less nicely. But sports is a part of it.
Last question for you, Chris. You've been so generous with your time.
Sure, of course.
Appreciate you coming down. This is maybe a tough one. If there's a professional athlete in today's era that you think could be president, or in the preceding era? Who you got?
I mean, the most obvious one. So I'm going to subtract out their interest in politics, right? Because I don't know.
Yeah.
Brady is like the most obvious one.
See, I don't think he'd make it.
You don't.
No, I don't think he could handle the debate stage.
So it's interesting. It's a really good It's a really good point. So I'm looking at it purely from like a
marketability.
Name ID.
Yeah.
He's seen as like all American.
Yeah.
Like he's got a great vibe.
Yeah.
He's got an incredible personal story. Whatever his 6th round pick or whatever the hell he was. To the best quarterback of all time. Like that arc is really sellable in politics, right?
Yeah.
That's how I'm thinking of it. As opposed to, no offense, but like the number 2 pick is less sellable.
Yeah, you can't do that.
Like,
well, unless you're.
Oh, we thought you were good and you were good.
Unless you're Donald Trump.
You're right. Unless you're Donald Trump.
Yeah.
He was actually the number 1 pick that year. You were number 2. I don't know if you knew that.
He was at Radio City the night before.
Right. Yeah, I don't know if you knew that. Yeah, he snuck in there. So it's a different thing. I'm looking at it purely like on paper.
Yeah.
Like on paper, Brady makes a ton of sense because he's so well known. You know who else would be? But yes. One of the things with the modern athlete, too, particularly if you're Brady, is you're not used to being questioned in any meaningful way. You're not used to being challenged.
He has such control of his
brand.
He
lives in a bubble.
That there's nothing that's going to get to him.
No one is like, Tom, you're wrong.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. And that would happen in
not
in
anymore.
Politics.
When he was with the Patriots.
Yeah, right.
Here's one for you. David Robinson. Now, I told David Robinson this on the phone once because we had interfaced on a charity thing, and I was like, hey, man, this is going to sound crazy. I'm just sitting here in my hotel room ready to play a game. And I was like, we're fucking this whole thing up. I was like, you could save the day. I just feel like David Robinson would be the best president.
Love him. Naval background.
Yeah, and he's kind of a centrist, it seems like, so he'd be able to appeal to a lot of people.
Does he live in Texas?
He's got to live in Texas, San Antonio or something.
Yeah.
But my man would be.
I got one other name for you from the NBA that I was thinking of, who I think would be good, is Chris Paul.
Chris Paul would be great.
Because he's already super political. He's already super political with it. Right. He's the head chair of the Players Association. He's already political. He's into politics. He and Steph helped Obama sell Obamacare.
Yes.
By the way, they helped sell signups for it. They did ads for it. I think being a point guard is actually like a useful training ground, trying to get a bunch of people involved.
Good actor, all-state.
Yeah, I know. I'm telling you, like he's someone. Again, we talked about this beforehand, but like professional athletics is one thing where your career is. You need to find a second career much younger than the average person, right? Like I don't know what the washout rate in the NFL is, but probably by the time
3 years,
right, 3 years.
Yeah.
So you're in your mid-20s, you got to find another gig.
Yeah.
You're in your mid-30s, you got to find another gig. So like Chris Paul is not old.
Yeah.
He's old for the NBA, but he's not old, particularly compared to who we're talking about.
Well,
running
he's
for
old
office.
enough that now he might just be able to walk right into the Oval Office with the age.
That's what I'm saying.
38 or
35.
35.
Yeah. Well, I'm not ready. So
you got some seasoning to do.
Chris, I appreciate the time.
Oh my gosh, I'm thrilled to do it.
It was
thrilled to
really
do it.
enjoyable.
Great to meet you.
Hope to interface again, man.
Love to.
Maybe in person, maybe on Zoom, but we'll get you.
Love to. I'd love to. Love the pod. Big fan. Big fan of yours.
I appreciate it. Listen to the full podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast streaming platforms. Wherever you want to get the podcast, you can get the podcast. Pretty simple. New episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. Podcasts get pretty wild. This is real tame.